Okay, welcome to the special show today on divestment, and I'm joined with people who are here in the panel. But before, I'm going to clarify a little bit what divestment we are talking about. We are talking about nuclear divestments, to move the money from the bank who invest money into developing nuclear weapons. And this divestment campaign have historical success, mainly in South Africa, who was used during the 60s to move the money from a company who have investment in South Africa to move the money somewhere else and to destabilize the apartheid government and to be able to free the people in South Africa and have Mandela as the president of the country. Now we are having a campaign that has been done in many parts of the world. Called Pink here, more specifically in the US, has launched in October last year a campaign of divestment on more general about military divestment, who are companies who are developing weapons. But here, more specifically, with Anthony and Ray here on the studio, and Susi, we're joining us by Skype from Netherlands. We're going to talk about divestment from nuclear weapons. Welcome. And Ray, maybe you want to give us a brief introduction of the campaign you have been working on for many years on nuclear. You have produced movies on the issue of nuclear weapons, and you're an expert.
Me?
Yes.
Well, I'm always learning, and I always have a lot more to learn. So we're all helping each other in this realm. I want to thank anyone who's watching this program. I hope by the end of this program, you're going to have what you need to know that you can do something about this horror of nuclear weapons, that we're here all united and colleagues around this issue. But I hope you can leave this show knowing that you can do something very practical. And so I just like to say, David, thank you very much. Pressenza, thank you very much for taking this time. This is a subject that is out of the media for a large part. And David and I, when we were walking on a peace walk on April 8th for Martin Luther King's assassination day, we did a peace walk. And he was lamenting that there's not much we can do about nuclear weapons. I'm like, whoa, there's a lot we can do, and offered this idea of doing something on divestment, which is very clearly something we can do besides advocating this tremendous ban treaty that we have before us. And I'm really honored to have two of the stars of this ban treaty with us on this panel, Ms. Ray Acheson, who is not only a director of Reaching Critical Will, which is with Women's League for Peace and Freedom International, which I can't say enough about your work, Ray, throughout this negotiating process with this ban treaty. Every day, Ray was not only there, but listening to every word that every delegate was saying, and in the evening, compiling these notes, making it all make sense, and giving it all back to us the next morning. All the delegates from all the countries that attended this ban treaty got these notes in the morning. All the civil society people like myself. It helped us really put the tremendous amount of thinking around the world together in one spot. So I don't know if we'd have this treaty if it wasn't for efforts like this. And so we'll get to it later, but Ray does have the Nobel Peace Prize, and Susi as well.
But that was a surprise.
Oh, it's a surprise? Okay.
We do it.
But they earned every bit of it. So, and Susi Snyder from the Netherlands, I can't say enough about the buoyancy of her spirit every day at this treaty conference. Well, both of them have been involved for many, many years, but at this conference every morning for a month and a half, just a tremendous positive spirit that and gave us a lot of hope each day and a lot of positivity when it seemed pretty dark and it seemed like this may not happen. Susi was always there saying it can, and this is why. And she also has given us a great tool don't bank on the bomb, which we'll go into more in this little talk. But don't bank on the bomb has given us a fantastic tool where we can all look at the financial institutions that we partake in, whether it's our bank or places we may place our finances. And it's a great tool to help us discern whether or not our monies are supporting this horrible industry making nuclear weapons. So anyway, here we are.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to be on this panel with our distinguished guests. Yeah.
Ray, tell us a little bit more about your project, what you have done, and
Sure,
we start
absolutely.
from there. Sure.
So I'll talk a little bit about the nuclear ban treaty that Anthony was referring to. So over the last few years, governments from around the world that have rejected nuclear weapons have gotten together to talk about the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons. So really going back to basics from the conversations that we were having in the 1980s about what nuclear weapons do to the environment, what they do to human bodies, to cities.
And the risk to go with it.
Absolutely. The risk of the potential use of nuclear weapons in the future, the risks of even having these weapons stored in certain territories.
And the test and the
testing,
maintaining.
absolutely. We've had, thousands of nuclear tests, and we've had many near uses of nuclear weapons because of misunderstandings. We've had a lot of accidents that have also almost led to nuclear detonations. So we've been very, very lucky to not see nuclear war or to not see the accidental use of a nuclear weapon for 70 plus years. But countries are very frustrated with the lack of international progress on nuclear disarmament. We've seen the levels come down from the end of the Cold War between the United States and Russia, but what we are seeing now is investment again in the modernization of these weapons.
And you start with Obama.
Absolutely, yes. He had a plan that would invest $1 trillion over the next 20 years in nuclear weapons. And these programs are being matched by Russia. There's the new development in France and the United Kingdom as well to extend the lives of their weapon systems into the indefinite future. We see India and Pakistan testing new types of nuclear weapons as well. So for the 9 countries that have nuclear weapons, they are all investing actively in these programs.
And they are all members, or most of them are members of the Security Council at the UN.
Yes, yes, 5 of them are. The United States, United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China are all UN Security Council members, and they are all members also of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which actually compels them to disarm. They are legally obligated to negotiate for the elimination of nuclear weapons.
And it's the 50 years of the NPT.
It is, yes, it is.
Today, yesterday, tomorrow.
It is the 50-year anniversary, and unfortunately, we have not seen the fulfillment of their obligation to negotiate with each other to eliminate nuclear weapons and to end the arms race. Instead, they're investing in a new arms race. So that's the current context in which states that have rejected nuclear weapons, which is the vast majority of countries in the world, wanted to
So it's
take
122,
action.
no? 122?
Well, so that's jumping ahead a little bit. But yeah, most countries don't have nuclear weapons. There's a handful of countries that are part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that support the U.S. having nuclear weapons. So they rely on U.S. nuclear weapons in their security, but they don't actually possess them themselves. But other than those countries, the rest of the world has rejected nuclear weapons for their security. And so throughout these conversations that we've had over the last few years about the humanitarian and environmental impacts of nuclear weapons, these countries wanted to negotiate a new treaty that prohibits the possession, use, threat of use, development of nuclear weapons for everybody. They wanted a new international instrument that would make nuclear weapons illegal for everybody, that went beyond the NPT and beyond the non-proliferation obligations to actually have something concrete for nuclear disarmament.
So you cannot sell, you cannot store, you cannot hold, you cannot keep, you cannot do, you cannot ship
do anything without with a nuclear weapon except to get rid of it under this treaty. And so this is actually where the divestment initiative comes from. The treaty does prohibit assistance with nuclear weapon activities. So that means that states that are party to this treaty, they can't be investing in companies that are producing nuclear weapon parts or components in any kind of assistance to develop nuclear weapons or to threaten to use nuclear weapons. And so through that, we have been advocating for several years now. Even before we had the treaty, we started work, the research that Susi will talk about for Don't Bank on the Bomb. That started before we got the treaty, but we've already started to see some impacts from that Susi will discuss since the treaty was adopted. And we looked at other weapons systems and divestment projects from other weapons as an example of how this could work.
Yeah.
So
chemical weapon?
Yes. Also cluster munitions and anti-personnel landmines. These are weapon systems that have been banned because they're indiscriminate weapons that cause harm to civilians. And we actually talked to some banks and financial institutions before we had the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And they were saying that, well, yes, we've divested from cluster bombs and from landmines because those weapons are prohibited by international law. But they didn't see nuclear weapons having that same kind of treaty. And so now we're able to go back to those same financial institutions and say, now there is a treaty, they are illegal, how will you respond to this?
I see. So, but maybe let's go to Susi and then we will come back because we have other questions. Susi, can you give us a little bit your part of your contribution here?
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me long distance. I appreciate that.
Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've been doing anti-nuclear work for long enough that my anti-nuclear activism can drink now. And what I love about it is I love being able to work to change policy and to do something about the worst weapon that was ever created. Right? Because nuclear weapons are designed to instantly vaporize a city. And that's something we need to always remember. That's the purpose, to make a whole city just vanish in a puff of smoke. Not exactly something that we want to see happen. And so it's something that can be quite frustrating, though, if you're not connected with international policy circles or in a small sort of hyper-wonkish community to feel like you can do something. And so about 5 years ago, we picked up on our colleagues' work around around investment in cluster munitions that Ray mentioned. And we worked with our colleagues and we put together the first Don't Bank on the Bomb report. And what Don't Bank on the Bomb does is it gives everybody a way to clearly state they oppose weapons that are designed to instantly vaporize a city. And it's something that gives us a chance to kind of make the norm against inhumane and indiscriminate weapons be felt a little bit differently by a different sector. And we've seen some really good action with it. You've been talking about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that was adopted last year. And since the treaty was adopted, we've had quite some significant success in the financial sector. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The fifth largest pension fund in the world is called ABP. A lot of pension funds and banks, they just go by letters.
Yeah, of course.
Makes our life, a little complicated. Alphabet soup every day. But ABP is the fifth largest pension fund in the world, and it's mostly it's a Dutch-registered Dutch fund, and it has about $1 billion US invested in nuclear weapon producers. But in January, they said that because of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, they were going to divest and get completely out of the nuclear weapon industry. So they're not going to profit from weapons of doom anymore. KBC, another big Belgian bank, due to not a whole lot of people's action, but a few people's activities and some pressure, good pressure, they announced just last month that, again, because of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, they're going to get they have one investment in a company associated with the French nuclear arsenal. They're going to get out of the game. And what we do with Don't Bank on the Bomb is we make it clear what companies are producing nuclear weapons and the key components for nuclear weapons, who is profiting from that production. So what financial institutions, banks, and pension funds are really trying to earn money off the production of nuclear weapons. And who are the good guys? Because there are good guys in this. And it's through the power of individuals and active, inspired, and inspiring people that we've seen some significant policy changes and seen some great advances around the world. And I'm really excited to see it. I'm excited to be on this panel because Anthony's one of those inspiring individuals. One of the great things we see coming up.
Susi, I have a question for you. So in Europe, how do you see the European community going along with that story?
Here's the thing. What we've seen is that the European financial community is has been a lot more open to addressing their responsibility under the assistance of the production of weapons. And so they move very much more quickly in rejecting any connection to that production of weapons. And it comes from, in some ways, it comes from the campaign activities around cluster munitions, but it also comes from interpretations of international law. And it actually started with chemical weapons. Nobody wants to see chemical weapons used. There's still a very clear and felt presence here of the history and the legacy of chemical weapons. Mm-hmm. And when looking at the treaty that makes chemical weapons illegal, the Oxford Public International Law, the commentary on the treaty, the interpretation, made it really, really clear that assistance also includes providing financial resources to any entity involved in the production of those weapons.
Wow, yeah.
And that's really important.
Yeah.
So that means you can't make money mm-hmm. off of chemical weapons. You can't make money off of making cluster bombs. Yeah. You can't make money when you're making nuclear weapons. So it's and we see a lot more receptivity to that here, which is quite exciting.
Uh-huh. And so in the US, it's a little bit different landscape than in Europe, mm-hmm. where here every state has a say on how the money is invested and with the support of the military. So how do you see the campaign be able to develop here in the US?
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of work here in the U.S. Mm-hmm. The narrative around nuclear weapons is different. But, there is such a long history of anti-nuclear activism in this country that has always been going on. Absolutely. And a lot of those same people who were active maybe in the 80s are re-energized now with this new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons and the new opportunities that creates for lobbying senators and congresspeople to give their support to the treaty to try and change government positions. It also opens up new space for us to work at the state and even the city level to get municipal action on nuclear weapons. And so one of the things that we're doing here in New York, Anthony, myself, a few other local campaigners with the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, we're actively trying to get the city of New York to divest from nuclear weapons. Wow. So right now we're focusing on New York City's pension funds, and there are 5 big pension funds: the police, firefighters, teachers, city workers, mm-hmm. etc. Mm-hmm. And so these pensions are invested in either companies that produce nuclear weapons or in investment firms, companies like BlackRock, for example, that put money into nuclear weapons production. Yeah. So the city is bound up with nuclear weapons, and most New Yorkers don't realize that. Of course. And most city employees and police officers, etc., they don't know that either. Of course. And so part of the campaign is educating the public and educating the beneficiaries mm-hmm. of these pension funds mm-hmm. about where their money is going, where the city money is going. But the campaign is also about changing that policy. So working directly with city councilors and the comptroller to move the money from nuclear weapons producing companies to more socially progressive.
Wow, that would be very interesting. Yeah. Wow. And
there's been quite some success on this already in other cities in the U.S. Not as big as New York.
Okay.
We have seen some good action on this. The city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, they passed a city council resolution instructing the city pension funds to divest. Ojai, California, which is paradise, I've been told. Also passed a resolution on this. Tacoma Park, Maryland has done the same, and Berkeley, California, which is one of the first nuclear weapon-free zone cities in the U.S., they just strengthened their nuclear weapon-free zone resolution and went back to it for the first time since the 80s.
Wow, that's good.
To really emphasize the fact that the city can't have anything to do with nuclear weapons and needs to support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It's nice to see some city
it's very great. Because when I did a couple of presentations on the problem of military issue in the US, and every state has some kind of, so it's not just a federal issue, it's, you need to work on every state. We make it much more complicated from outside to really understand the issue with the US military issue or military development, because we have 1,000 bases outside of the US, but here in the US, you have every state has some money invested into military. So it's very interesting to see the campaign who could be active in very local issue and very local. Anthony, do you want to add something to?
Well, there's so much. The history of divestment goes way back. You know, we have many inspiring examples. I think of Thoreau, who refused to pay his poll tax when we invaded Mexico in 1847, went to jail for that, which inspired Gandhi, which inspired Martin Luther King in his Poor People's Campaign. I mean, it all wraps together. We've been at this for a long time. But Martin Luther King, his Poor People's Campaign was all about what you're talking about. It was all about realizing that racism has a lot to do with our militarism and this profit-orienting. And the beautiful thing is we have a lot of military, high-ranking military people after they retire who are also totally with us in this campaign, who are totally supportive of waking and educating people up about the complete disaster and abomination that one nuclear weapon can have. We have General Lee Butler. There are many to cite, but General Lee Butler, who was the head of all our strategic command, who is saying these things are militarily useless. They're extremely dangerous. They're extremely costly, and we really need to get rid of them. So this is someone who knows all about our nuclear strategic forces and commanded them all, saying this. We've had many, Paul Nitsky, who was President Reagan's chief negotiator, arms negotiator with the Soviets, who was actually for 40 years of his life a hawk, and for building more and more nuclear weapons. And in the end, what did he come up with? In the end, when he retired, he looked back and just said, you know, the best thing to do would be to unilaterally disarm, get rid of our nuclear weapons. So this is someone who knew every inch of about these nuclear weapons. But all the great Americans, if we needed examples, every great American you can think of has been against nuclear weapons. And you can hear their voices, at least I do, supporting people like Ray and Susie and reveling in this new energy that they have gathered with the youth today, and the new direction that it is a huge fresh wind that has come in to this movement. But we are all together. Eleanor Roosevelt, our Pope Francis right now, Pope John back then in the 60s with John F.K., John Kennedy, was also turning towards getting rid of nuclear weapons when we lost both of them. But truly, Pope Francis has been very outspoken. Both Susie and Ray can speak more about what he's been doing. But all our great Americans, Dorothy Day and the Berrigans and Muhammad Ali, Dick Gregory, Albert, well, just we can go on and on, right? We have a long list to support us. Just when did I wake up to money? And because I grew up really believing in my country, and I still do. I believe in that. That my father was in the military. All my uncles served. In a couple of days, we have July 4th, where we really celebrate the founding of this country and a lot of our soldiers. My father was one, and you know, they gave their lives, these people, for this country and the values that I uphold. And I think nuclear weapons, there's absolutely none of the valor in nuclear weapons that our soldiers have had when they've gone to battle. There's been none of the courage does it take to push a button, none of the wisdom that they had, none of the self-sacrifice that our soldiers have had, and our military has shown. Those who gave their lives for this land and for the freedom around the world. Nuclear weapons wipes all that out. There's no patriotism in a nuclear missile. There's no morality in a nuclear missile. As Susie said, they just wipe out just wipes out a whole city of us, of people, humanity. And our forefathers and my relatives did not stand for that kind of.
But right now, it's a very important discussion on the geopolitical level. I mean, if we see the discussion with Iran, if we see the discussion with North Korea, if we see the discussion, I mean, all the big discussion in the world right now are in some way connected to nuclear weapons.
Absolutely.
So how? And then, but nobody knows very much about the situation of the nuclear weapons, the money we spend in nuclear weapons, the tax that people are paying, and who goes to nuclear weapons.
I'll let others talk, but it is a completely secret industry that is kept from the American people. It has nothing to do with our democratic process. And I'll just go back. I found out about our connection. I went to protest the Vietnam War, actually, to find out more about it in 1970. I went down to Wall Street because I was told some Vietnam vets were going to be down there. I didn't really know why. I was 18 years old. And I just wanted to hear some people just back from the war give me some insight as to what was happening. But within a half hour of being there and listening, and there were a couple of hundred of us, we were surrounded by thousands of thousands of construction workers. And Wall Streeters started throwing graffiti from the windows down upon us. The police moved away, and thousands of construction workers went charging at the few hundred of us that were there just to get information about what was happening with this war. And they sent 80 of us to the hospital. And that's where it clicked, oh, money has something to do with our wars. So money has something to do with why we're in these wars. And this industry is all about the profiteering of a few. And we're finding that out more and more each day. And that's why we're here talking about something that we can actually do, each of us, with our money. And the organizations that we partake in, whether it's a church or a bird watching group, it doesn't matter. Each of us can gather together and do something in terms of divestment. And Susie has made this tool for us that is greatly helpful. But I'm sorry, and I can go on for a little bit. But,
anything to say about what's
the connection, you're absolutely right. It's in all of our states. All of our Congress people fight to have these industries. They get money. So yes, it's very insidious.
3 to 13% on GDP from the military in the US. Every state. You don't have one. I think it's maybe one state who doesn't have any. Maybe Hawaii doesn't have anything on me. The rest, it's every state. Even New York, even has very little, but still make money from military story.
Absolutely, and that's what makes this such a great time as well for having these national conversations about where are we spending our money, what are our priorities, and there is a lot of new activism. There's a new generation of activists getting engaged on various issues, whether it's gun violence or whether it's climate change or if it's inequalities, poverty, etc. There's a real thirst, I think, for change in this country, in particular right now. And we have an opportunity in our work on nuclear weapons, especially the divestment projects, to really connect that to these other issues and these other concerns that people have, because it really is all connected. At the bottom line, it is about our priorities.
And I started a little bit with the story of South Africa, because the campaign was mainly run by the students in university, and they were the one pushing the corporation and the university itself to disinvest from a company in South Africa. So if we have that renew and little bit learn from that experience to be able to reactivate here, because it's a scale. We need to scale it at the large level if we want to make it successful. So that's where you get the challenge are to how can we move millions of dollars to somewhere else. So you make it's unprofitable to invest into military or nuclear weapons. That would be fantastic.
Absolutely. And we have endless historical examples, of course. I mean, you've given some excellent ones. Anthony's given some excellent ones as well. We do know how to do this, but it can seem like an overwhelming task. And I think that is ultimately what drives people away from long-term activism. I mean, Susi was saying how long she's been engaged in this work, and it's hard to keep it up. There's a lot of struggles, a lot of challenges, and you're told constantly that it won't work, and that what you're doing doesn't matter, and that it won't have an effect even if you do achieve whatever it is that you're setting out to achieve. And a lot of activism is really just about overcoming that sort of pressure from the outside and your own internal doubt, I think, that comes up. So I think a really important message for anybody that might be watching this and thinking about what they can contribute. It is just up to all of us as individuals, but also within our own communities, to keep each other going to do this work. And to make sure that we are engaged sustainably in this work, but that we always believe that we can actually make change, because we can. We've seen over history how things have moved in a particular directions, and sometimes we take 2 or 3 steps back. And it can feel like we're losing ground. But the only progressive change that has ever come has been because of people's movements, because of activism, because of people willing to stand up to power and demand that their voices be heard.
No, and then the challenge, I mean, you mentioned poverty, you mentioned environment, where you can see it in your life. I mean, poverty, it's if you pay attention, you can see it. Where nuclear weapons and nuclear energy, it's much more complicated. It's much more where are they, how many, what. That's where I think we need to become a little bit astute to talk about the issue, because for people it's a little bit far away from the daily life. And that's why I like to do this type of show, because we try to make it as much as possible as part of the conversation, of day-to-day conversation of, you pay for nuclear weapon when you pay your taxes. 50% go from your taxes to military expenses, budget, and so on and so forth. And part of that money go and to develop new nuclear weapons with a new research who has been developed into that story. So are you for it? Are you against it? If you are against it, do something with the money. I don't know, Susi, you want to you were a long time we didn't hear you. Do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking, sometimes it's really difficult for the big numbers to make sense. And especially when you're talking about nuclear weapons, like the U.S. projected spending on nuclear weapons is over $1 trillion. And $1 trillion is an imaginary thing.
Exactly.
Number that, it's not a number I will ever see that much money. If I live to be 100, I'll never see it. So $1 trillion is really hard. But when you think about what does it actually mean and what could that money do, it's easier to break it down to smaller chunks. So, for example, the U.S. spending on nuclear weapons is about $70,000 a minute of every day for the next 30 years.
Wow.
So if you think about $70,000, we can all relate to $70,000.
Wow.
You know, that's not a hard imaginary concept.
Uh-huh.
It's like when you think about what nuclear weapons do, it's hard to imagine anyone who would be so conceited. You know, the 8 men and 1 woman who are in control of the use of nuclear weapons. It's very hard to think of any of those 9 people to be so conceited that they would destroy the world over. It used to be a lot harder to think of that, but it's still a little bit hard to think of that. And instead to think about, well, if there was a nuclear bomb dropped near where I live, for example, in Rotterdam, the smallest of the small, with the least impactful type of detonation, that's still 60,000 people that would die. 60,000 is a number that I am not comfortable with, so I want to do something about it. I want to prevent that from ever being used. I want it to be real, and for my concerns about it to be taken seriously. And that's why I'm really excited. I think that the divestment activity is a very straightforward way for those concerns to be taken seriously. And if you're concerned just about nuclear weapons, or if you're concerned about all weapons and and the production of weapons, there are tools to find out if your money is connected. Don't Bank on the Bomb focuses on nuclear weapons explicitly.
Yeah.
But in the U.S., Weapons Free Funds looks at all weapons production. And you can find out if your retirement account is connected to the production of weapons, and then what type of weapons. And we help provide some research for that, because we think it's important for people to be able to make a choice that matters to them. And I want to live, I want to live a nice life. I want to live a long time, and I want to have a healthy retirement and be able to retire and not, work until I'm dead.
Uh-huh.
Do fun stuff in my retirement. So I'm prepared for that, and I'm saving my money. I save my money to do that, and that's fine. People should do that, but think about how you're going to save your money. Think about where is your pension going, and think about the choices that you make. And divestment, it's a cool tool because it's a norm. It's saying that this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. And I'll be honest with you, when it comes to making your retirement secure, investing in sustainable funds is a lot less volatile. We found, so I track the companies that produce nuclear weapons and see what they're doing in the market and see when they're making a profit and when they're not. And this last year has been really up and down and up and down and up and down, and to the point that I would not feel secure about my personal future if that's where I had investments. I'd much rather, be connected to production of nice things like wind energy or, solar energy or small businesses, and looking at micro business. These are things that actually give a steady, simple return. So people need to think about what it is that they want in the world, but also what they want for themselves and where do the values align. And then to look at the great tools out there to make sure that they're together. Because you can do something yourself, you can do something with your community, you can do something with your city, you can do something with your country. There's always lots of options to take your activism forward. And, it is, as Ray said very clearly, it is the power of people that makes change. Nobody who's comfortable right now profiting from the production of nuclear weapons is going to want to change that. It's up to us to make it uncomfortable, and we are. And it's a really neat thing. I mean, even the largest bank in Germany, and Germany hosts American nuclear bombs. Germany is very much part of the nuclear weapons establishment. But Deutsche Bank said, ooh, people don't like to be associated with nuclear weapons. This is bad for our image. We better change this. And that's sending a signal at the highest levels politically. And so, small actions have big impacts. So I encourage people to be pebbles in the pond.
But I think, so, no, Susie, I agree with the notion of images. I think it's a good moment to add a social level and use the social media and social network to associate companies to bad behavior or to unsolicited action. And I think the bank, they're going to respond very much if we start to target them and tell the story of what they are doing. And no, you have this.
Well, actually, Anthony
Anthony,
did a lot of work with Amalgamated Bank here in New York City. So I think it would be great if we could hear a little bit about that project.
Okay. And thank you very much, Ray, for connecting the silos of all the movements. That is what's happening. And Susie, thank you. Yeah, it's not just about divesting, which is very important, but it's what do we want to invest in? And you mentioned the many things we can invest in that sustain life and that we really need desperately right now. And I just going back to history for a second again, in the 70s and 80s, this city, New York City, and many cities, hundreds of cities in the US, did resolutions, proclamations, talking about the arms race, wanting to get rid of the arms race, and a lot of them wrote very clearly that we need this money for education of our children, for health care for our people, for housing, for protecting our environment. This is going back, these are resolutions going back to 1970, 79, lots of them in the 80s that repeated this over and over again. We need this money for other things. So it's great today to have this tool that helps us. And yeah, I'm just, if you're out there saying, well, look, I don't have much money, I only have a couple of $1,000 in my bank account, what difference does it make? It does. And thanks, Ray. Amalgamated, well, I belong to an interfaith group in the East Village, and in 2010, we went around to check out all the banks in our area. There's now about 15 different banks in our area. There used to be none. I remember when there was no banks in our area. But now that we make a lot of money down there, they've come. So we went around interviewing, and I went around interviewing which banks are giving back to the community, which banks are doing things that are sustainable that we believe in. And Amalgamated just came up shining for me. But this is hard for all of us to switch. We're all creatures of habit. I was with Chase Bank for 40 years. It was my first bank account. I knew everyone in the bank. Everything is connected to this, my automatic pays, etc. But I just look at their policy statements and it kept gnawing at me. It wasn't until Occupy Wall Street came that I said, all right, there's a lot of sense going on down there. And that's the thing that made me look into it, made me switch to Amalgamated. But in terms
so no, but what are the steps? What did you do to make it work for you?
Those steps to switch to a bank is really easy. You go into the bank that you find, and Susie is developing a very extensive list. So there are others, but Amalgamated is my local bank here in New York. And they made it really easy. It happened in one day. Found a fantastic financial advisor, Robert Mante, and he just guided me through the steps, how to do that. So
with your work, you send a letter to your work. What did you do?
That's all very easy steps. The automatic pays, that can all transfer within a day. They'll teach you how to do it safely. But here's the thing about nuclear weapons. I felt good about Amalgamated being ethical, being for the environment, women's rights, LGBT rights. They're on the right side of so many issues that meant a lot to me. But my mother, who was a strong supporter of our work here against nuclear weapons, and helped me do a lot of research for the documentary I did years ago, and got sick and passed away with me every day. But she had some money, not much, but I got about $40,000 worth of, Merrill Lynch mutual funds and these instruments, financial instruments. I know very little about finances myself. I just know not to go in the red in my life. So I got this gift from my mother, and they told me not to touch it. These stocks and bonds are doing really well, so just leave them alone. I said, fine. I put them in there, but I brought them to my financial advisor in Amalgamated, and you can do this with your monies. I encourage everyone to go into their own portfolios, retirement funds, whatever, and just see what's there, because I had no idea. So here I am. I've done a documentary on nuclear weapons. It's been a passion of mine for many decades. And I find one of the key investments that's now in my bank account is Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Honeywell. These are all, and I'm like, okay. So I am the owner of these stocks. And so I got out of them. It took a couple of hours. But with a good financial advisor, he can switch, as Susie has mentioned, you can switch very easily to things that make money, that are helping. This earth barely needs every dollar towards positive things to help this environment of ours survive and to help humanity with the real challenges that are before us that we're ignoring with these that we're just stepping on with these military budgets.
No, but
that's my story.
I think it's very clear the why we will do it, but I think the complication of doing it, it's more, it's overtaking the why we are doing it. So that's why I was a little bit asking you the steps you did, because it's very important for people to understand, and it's not that complicated. And I mean, and so I think we need to help on that level of how do you do it physically, how do you go?
Yeah, and I think, as you know, it is an easy enough process, as Anthony said. I think one of the first steps, if you are interested in this, is to call up the bank that you're currently with. If it's, go through the Don't Bank on the Bomb report, see where your bank is. If your bank is on the list of banks that does invest in nuclear weapon companies, related companies, then call your bank and ask them if they would consider divesting. And if they say no, then tell them that that's why you're moving your money. I think that's an important step to this, to make them realize that people do care about where their money is being spent, and that you can also look to see if your bank has divested from fossil fuels or from cluster bombs and landmines and other weapons. See if they have an ethical divestment portfolio. If they do, ask them to add nuclear weapons to that. So you can try to work with your financial institution, but if they're not going to change, then that's when you move to another bank.
Exactly.
And Don't Bank on the Bomb resources also have many positive examples, so of the places where you can move your money to, or you can do what Anthony did and go around and visit local banks.
No, that would be very interesting. Just imagine you call your bank. I mean, you have like 2,000 people in New York who call the bank every day.
Absolutely.
I mean, are you going to move the money? I mean, that will make a big difference. Yeah. It could be very interesting.
So that's a big part of this process, is communicating to the banks what we want to see our money spent on, or to our retirement funds, etc. And then I think the other piece that's really interesting of the work that Anthony did with Amalgamated is that once you did switch over, you actually inspired them to release a statement saying that they have never invested in nuclear weapons and that they never would, or in any weapons. So having
you make them do the statement, or you write the statement for them?
Well, thank you very much. It's all about building personal. You're very right. When I left Chase, I did go to them, and that's a very important point. Thank you for bringing that up. Let them know, look, it's not personal. I love you guys, but this is why I'm doing it. And they understood. It's funny. People understand. So we got to do this. No, what happened with you developed...
You mean Chase understood, or who Amalgamated understood?
Well, when I left Chase, they understood why I was leaving. I told them why. They know me.
Okay.
But Robert Mante, who's the vice president of Amalgamated, who was just great, you develop a personal relationship with whomever is dealing with your money. That's the first thing, is get to know each other as human beings. And he knew about my project. He knew about my work on this documentary. I gave it to him when it came out, so he knew this. Taking care of my mother. When my mother was sick, I had to stop my documentary for about a year and to put it on hold to take care of her, which was an honor. But so Robert knew all about my fervor for this. And when my mom passed away and we went through my portfolio, I discovered that me, of all people, had money in the weapon companies. So it was that revelation that he helped me discern and find out about, helped me move. And that's when I said, can we do this for other people? But he also knew, as soon as I told him about Susi, as soon as I met you, Susi, and this movement, ICAN's movement with the treaty, I just would talk to him about it every day. So he was naturally interested. So I did ask them. I pleaded with them, and I sent them a lot of times your notes, your daily notes, to keep people abreast of what was happening in the treaty. And I asked them if we could get a statement from the bank, because they were on board. I spoke to Yvonne Fishberg, who's their vice president of policies on the environment, on climate issues, other really good policies Amalgamated Bank has. And they did a lot of internal talking, and I just kept sending them stuff from the treaty, from other organizations that are helping this process along. And
so it's not just a talk. They do the work. They are implicate themselves into that.
Well, they have these same values of protecting the planet. Amalgamated's a great bank, and they believe in sustaining the planet. I kept just hitting home to them that, one nuclear missile can really mess up our entire planet. And
New York City,
all these other human rights and workers' rights that we care so much about, that they have worked so hard on, the impact of these weapons, the money that they take from all these great causes that they work on, how they be impacted. And that made sense to them. So I asked if they could make a statement, and they did. They came out with a statement purposefully, the day the treaty was going to come to the UN for signature on September 20th. They made a public statement, and it was a beautiful thing, and I want to thank both Ray and Susi for broadcasting that and supporting that move, because it should encourage all financial institutions and all banks to do the same. There's no reason not to. You can make money and feel really good about where you're putting your money.
So Susi, you came with the Nobel. Just give us the story about the Nobel, about the campaign, and then show us the surprise. We have very short time left.
Can I interrupt?
Sure.
Because Susi and Ray were both on the front row at the ceremony in Oslo for this award, and they deserve to be in that front row. And so, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no,
it's a beautiful ceremony. I so urge everyone to listen to every word that was said there by the Nobel Committee, and
so my big surprise, in 2007, ICAN got the Nobel Peace Prize. And
2017.
2017, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yes, so the campaign was founded in 2007, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And we achieved the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in July 2017. It'll be 1 year, actually, 7th of July, this Saturday. And in that October, it was announced that ICAN had won the Nobel Peace Prize, both for inspiring this new humanitarian discourse and also for encouraging governments and helping governments shape this treaty. So yes, I did bring it for everyone to see.
Great.
So this is the Nobel.
Congratulations.
I'll move this out of the way, maybe.
You're going to have to turn it,
Yeah, think to that one.
Pressenza.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is it. We were able to be in Oslo. Many people from the campaign came to Oslo, so it was a nice family reunion. It's a very big campaign. So this is really a collective prize for anti-nuclear
with
activism.
Abolition 2000 and so on and so
there's
forth.
so many groups that have
groups.
been involved in this for so many years. And ICAN itself has 468 organizations in 101 countries at the time that we won.
Wow.
And we've had so many active people all over the world. There's been really an interest throughout the global south. There's been a renewed interest from younger generations as well to work on this issue. And ICAN's really done a good job of bringing everyone together. And so we got as many people as we could in Oslo, brought together to celebrate this
Congratulations again.
Yeah, but 1 year on, we are certainly as hard at work as we ever were. This hasn't slowed us down at all. It's just given us more space to talk to the public about what this means and what we can do with this treaty.
We have to wrap up. Susi, do you have any comment to make before we go?
Yeah, I just want to encourage your viewers, if you're interested in learning more about this and you want to get connected, especially with those others in New York City, there's a great place you can check out. It's nycdivest.org. And you can learn more about activities going on in New York City, as well as connect to other divestment activities and learn more about nuclear weapons.
Oh, great.
So nycdivest.org.
Thank you so much, Susi, for being with us today.
Yeah.
And Ray, Anthony, one of you want to add special?
Go ahead.
Oh, well, we'll post a lot of information on the site to give you links for.
Sure.
But no, thank you. Yes, around the world, people in Germany, there's a huge protest going on right now about our nuclear missiles there to get rid of them. The same with the UK at Foslane. Later this summer, people are trying to speak up. But yeah, education is it. Please get as much information as you can from ICAN, and we're happy to support you. Thank you, David, very much. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you to you, did everything. Thank you so much for helping to do the show today. Ray.
Thank you very much for having us on. I really hope that this has been inspiring for some people to get involved.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
We need everybody that we can get, and
absolutely.
whatever your passion is, whatever your interest is, there is a home for you in the divestment campaign, because all of our issues are brought together when it comes to money.
Thank you so much. That was the show for today. I hope you keep watching your news on Pressenza.com. If you have any comments, any information you need to or have to share with us, please do it. Pressenza.com, and hope to hear and see you soon. Thank you very much.